What's up there, Workforce? Chris here with Work To Game, and I want to ask the question, should Blue Mage ever be allowed in groups? It's something that I kind of had some opinions on going into Blue Mage. Some of those opinions I really didn't want to base too much on until I got at least to try this initial sampling, this 1 to 50 sampling. And so I wanted to talk briefly about, should Blue Mage ever be allowed in, let's call it public play, where you can go into roulettes, you can go into PvP, you can do MSQ. It's a lot to chew on. So first of all, to the people who have always wanted Blue Mage and they've only played this game hoping they'd add Blue Mage and they just wanted to main Blue Mage and now it's here and they can't main Blue Mage, for that select group of people, I am sorry, because I don't think it's ever going to be that. If you're a percentage of the population, the people who always wanted a black mage and always wanted a warrior and always wanted a red mage, they've all gotten what they wanted. So to deny you kind of sucks. But I really do think that's a small percentage of the population. I think the vast majority of people are like, oh, I currently main X and I would switch to blue mage. But you're not going to quit the game. Like, you have a class you're happy with. You just might like blue mage a little more. So from a content development standpoint, I would say think about it. I have the same issue with adding races, so let's just kind of talk about the math on that. So you spend X development dollars adding something, and the question is, what do you gain for it? So if right now I play through the game on a single character and that character is assigned a race, how does adding a race to the game add to the player base, add to the player experience? It adds to the RPers, but that's not everybody. It adds to possibly the draw to new players. Okay, that's a good one. But are there people who will now switch their race and continue to subscribe that would not have stayed subscribed at their existing race? I don't think so. I just do not think that that is even a substantial portion of the population at all that will literally a race, because there's no racial background, like backstories, where we get to go explore like a whole new storyline, but only if you're Al Ra or only if you're Makote or only, it's not like I have access to quests that Brian doesn't because we're different races. It's not like I have access to a whole different set of abilities because we're different races, or a whole different job because we're different races. The races in this game, outside of you feeling like you're more invested in your character, are largely just glamour. They are just appearances only. And I think it's important to have appearances, and I think glamour is an important system. I think selling glamour items on the store is an important thing. I think giving out them for seasonal events, one-time events, doing achievements, I think those are all wonderful things. But when you talk about adding to the player experience, you can only do so much of that before you've gotten your saturation, and adding any more is really not going to get you a lot of bang for your buck. And so I really struggle to want them to constantly add races, because I don't think that it's going to largely add to the sustainability of the game long term. People will pay for a race swap now, so it does probably make them money, and then they'll get bored of that. And so that it's just not an engaging way to play when you compare that to consumable content, when you compare that to quests you can go do, or something as large as a housing system. Like, if you want to talk about glamour, a housing system is something that you can go dump hundreds and hundreds of hours in. It's not like switching races is something I can go on a 100-hour quest line to explore the narrative behind this race and all of that. And so I really think about kind of classes the same way. So if we say that class number 1 is your current main, and you've been playing that class since ARR. So you played all the way through a storyline in an expansion, you got the loot, and then the vast majority of players in this game, I think, only main one class. So the huge bucket over here of everybody, the big chunk of them, that's it. They do the one and they're done. Now there's a slightly smaller group that then go through and play on a second class. And the biggest amount of variety you can add to this, in my opinion, would be to pick a different role. So if you did a ranged caster, at least switch to a melee DPS, but maybe try a healer or a tank. That can be a drastically different play experience. But you don't do MSQ again. I mean, there's a handful of you that have multiple characters, but that is usually people that like the RP side of the game, or want to play on multiple servers, which hopefully in 4.57 becomes you don't have to do that unless you just want to. So we've got this second group that are not getting a full second playthrough, but they're getting a form of a second playthrough. So maybe it doubles the amount of content they're enjoying at in-game, but probably not. They might be doing twice the amount of Eureka, but they're not doing twice the amount of Savage. They're not doing they're still stuck on the same tome cap because it's all on one character. So, you know, even if they split their time between two, it's now half the time instead of what would have been all the time on the main. So they're not doubling the content, but it's a huge gain. So for adding a second class to the game, they got all this runway. And you have to have a certain number of classes just to create enough variety that you appeal to people, and I think we're already there. So adding more is the question here. Now, by the time you add a third class to the game, maybe people are playing a tank, a healer, a DPS, and a melee DPS and a ranged DPS, so they're playing their 4, but they're not, at that point in the number of hours per week that the average player plays, you're not getting to enjoy the game 4 times as much. It's not like if I had one class that I liked, I'd play 8 hours a week, and if I had 4 classes that I liked, I'd play 32. It jumps from 8 to 12, 8 to 16. So there's a diminishing returns there. So adding a class to the game, a typical mainline class, we're getting 2 of those jobs next expansion outside of Blue Mage. People have speculated Dancer and Gunblade, and that's great. But we're getting those 2. I don't know what those add. They're definitely new and fun to try. They're new and fun to level once, but they're going to share gearing with somebody else, so there's not going to be time added to the game for gearing. The number of people that got all their relics before is pretty small, so the idea that you needed even more classes to get relics for adds a very small amount to the game. Same with Palace of the Dead and stuff like that. Heaven on High weapons. Very few people went and got them all and said, man, I wish there was even more classes I could go get them for. So I think that's... I struggle to understand how that's going to make the game sustainable. If they added a class every month for the next 100 months, we would have a ridiculous number of classes. And if they could be inventive every time and they were all fun and they were all balanced, I don't think the game gets 100 times better. I think the game gets marginally better. And honestly, creates a lot of gaps for gear that doesn't fit right, and content that's not balanced right, and groups that don't feel supported. And I think that there's just as much risk at harm as there is good. And so I really struggle to see how Blue Mage being added as a main class could have added long-term to the game. I think, yes, it could have made Stormblood launch really fun. But what does it do in 7.0, 8.0, 9.0? And 100% of my issues with this game right now are not based on the current content and the current content serving. 100% of them are looking at the practices and saying, I can already tell you that for me and some of the players I know, that there are practices in place that are not sustainable. That doesn't mean that if the game maintained the way it is now that I would eventually quit, but it does mean that I'm aware of why people quit. And I shouldn't be. The game should be so good that I have to question a little bit. And right now somebody goes, yeah, I don't play that anymore. I don't really dive a whole lot deeper. I go, oh, why? And they go, I just don't. Okay. And I just move on because I can already think of multiple reasons to play something else. Because this game has a narrow serving compared to what it could within its existing systems. It doesn't need to be a different game to bring in more people. It can take systems they already have and just finish them. The Choco system, the Squadron system, Grand Companies, all these systems are in the game and they're done in an engaging way, and then the content serving just stops. So they have this beautiful dungeon lineup and they do a great job getting us back for roulettes, but then once I've capped on everything I need from tomes and all my characters are at level cap, there's not a good reason to go back and run dungeons unless I just want to run them with people. Like once I've run 1,000 of each dungeon, there's not an engaging reason to keep running. And so those are really my concerns with the game, and I don't see how adding Blue Mage adds to that. So that was a very long-winded way of saying why I think Blue Mage shouldn't be added as a main class, but why should it be added as a limited job. A limited job is the first piece of content they have developed that says you can play this differently. You can do your main class and possibly your secondary and maybe even a third and very rarely a fourth. You may have them all leveled, but how often do you really log on and play substantially on each? And so you get through however far down the rung you go, and there is a number of players that drops off each time you add to the number of classes that something's asking you to play. Every single one of those tiers can go and enjoy Blue Mage. And for the number of people that ripped on Blue Mage, gosh, even in Shout yesterday there were people ripping on Blue Mage, and they were currently on a Blue Mage. So they, there is so many people that are going and trying this out, and they're playing the game differently, and they're in zones that I can't tell you how many patches it's been since I was in that zone or that part of that zone, but I can tell you how many addresses I've lived at since then. I can tell you that I've changed jobs more than once since then. I can tell you that we've changed presidents since then. We've changed. I mean, it's been a while. There's my life has changed. I think back to a different time on my life when I think about the last time that I took the Aetherite to Bent Branch Meadows multiple times in a day. So it was really cool to go back. It brought back a lot of really fond memories. And so the idea that a limited job can breathe life into these beautiful, deep zones is fantastic. And the idea that I have skills that just let me break the game. My heal is ridiculous. We have damage abilities that, given the right context, depending on which level of content, are ridiculous. The amount of content I ran unsynced yesterday, fantastic. There's just so many things about Blue Mage that made me enjoy the game totally differently. That my thought on, like, should this ever be tamed back? No. This should never be allowed in mainline group play. So if it is in mainline group play, what does that look like? Well, I'd say the first thing that looks like is, if there's like a PvP, for example, it should be Blue Mage only PvP. And each week they should deal you 8 of the 128 spells, and everybody gets them. If any of you ever play a lot of shooting games, sometimes there's challenges where you have to do something with a certain gun, or I think Titanfall had a mode where, like, you could go one-on-one head-to-head and you were dealt a primary and secondary and perks. Blue Mage could totally explore that. You could have masked carnival challenges that are done weekly, and it just says, here's your build. Ta-da! And maybe you have to have all these skills unlocked before you can go partake in that. So this week, sorry. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's like a lot of the MOBAs where there's something you can try each week. It's like, hey, I'm not going to tell you where these abilities are, but you've made it to 50. You've cleared everything. Hop into the Masked Carnival. We're going to show you some abilities you've never seen before. And that'll encourage you to go out and finish out your spellbook. And just see if you can clear this content. PvE content, PvP. So if it's going to do anything more to be closer to mainline, then I think that it needs to be in a equally as game-breaking way. There is something really exciting about saying we have something that doesn't fit the mold of normal battle content, and we want to just go with it. I don't know why it's not allowed in main story. That's something I think they could lift the ban on, but I do understand why it's not allowed in roulette trials. I do understand why it's not, it's probably never going to be in Savage and stuff, and a really clever way of doing that without outright banning it and making people upset is Brian kind of mentioned yesterday, well, what if they don't let it hit cap ever? What if you just keep it 10 levels below the current level? So if we're at level 80, it's at level 70. Once we get a level 90, it goes to level 80. If you always keep it 10 levels behind, it'll never be in the current MSQ. It'll never be in the current beast tribes. It'll never be in the current zones. It'll never be in the current dungeon content. It'll never have a reason to be in the roulettes outside the leveling roulette. And so then you're only banning the leveling roulette, PvP, and then any content that just it doesn't fit. People saying, oh, I wish I could date in Palace of the Dead. Future limited jobs may work in Palace of the Dead. Blue Mage does not. Literally, the way it levels doesn't work. I made it to level 50 yesterday. I only had 19 skills when I hit 50. I got my 20th skill right after, and which then I immediately got my 21st, and then we ran some stuff last night and got 22, 20, and so we continued working our way up. So I've got right around half the abilities right now, and then I know that there's some locked behind content that I just haven't even attempted yet, because it tells me what dungeon type content it drops behind, and I've just been waiting to do that with Brian and them. So I don't know. I don't think it should ever be allowed in dungeon content. I don't think it should ever be allowed to be dragged through other people's lives. The fact that I could have made it all the way to 50 with just water cannon, I don't want to be in a party and then I'm tanking and Brian's healing and we get handed 2 DPS that are doing 20 DPS per second, because if they don't have better abilities, there are certain abilities that are just necessary to doing decent DPS at certain level ranges. And if they don't have those, it's awful. The other side of that is it is a little ridiculous that if you do run it with a party roulette, you can blast things down, because all the blue mage abilities that I've seen are classified as rank 1, which means that if you do go into content scaled, like if you were to be allowed into like Sastasha after you had all 50 abilities, you have things that would be doing 1,000 damage. Just outright. Unmitigated, unmodified, 1,000 damage. So you would tear things up. So that may seem really fun for you, but like I don't know that gives everybody. It's weird that you'd have. It's already a little weird when you add classes to the game like Red Mage and stuff, where they're already a little too powerful. This class is ridiculously overpowered in underleveled content. So I agree with their decision. Seeing what now a little more of what they saw behind the scenes when they said we don't want to allow it into kind of mainline. My initial thoughts were, yeah, totally makes sense. Now that I've gotten my hands on it, I 100% hope that this content is never allowed in public group play, because if it is, that means they've diluted it somehow. And I think it's really neat how it plays now. It is a fantastic piece of lateral content that you can go explore after your main class. It is something that adds to the game. You're not going to replace your Black Mage playtime with Blue Mage playtime. In the next expansion, you're going to continue to play Black Mage, and now you're also going to play Blue Mage. And that is more time in the game. That is more time exploring things you've never seen before. I would love for them to bring it into the current zone, and I think they could, but they don't have to. It could be very fun without it. It'll be neat to see if it gets to interact with things like the trust system and stuff. So I would love to personally go do my Beast Tribes on it. So if they would let it hit cap, I think that'd be great. But it will be perfectly great content even if they don't. So that is kind of my thoughts. I know there's some of you that disagree. I know some of you have sound reasoning, so I would love to hear that down below. If you agree with me, let me know. Maybe you agree, but for different reasons. Let me know. Charlie here is kind of freaking out. So thank you guys so much for everybody that hung out yesterday. We had a very long stream, and that's why Charlie's freaking out. He's got his food time. So those of you that hung out yesterday and saw Charlie face cam, he's been hanging out here in my lap, and he's starting to get hungry. So I'm going to take off. Thank you guys so much. My name's Chris with Work To Game. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll talk to you next time.
What's going on, Workforce? Chuck here. It's been a good long month, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for hitting that subscribe button. I just wanted to invite my friend Terry, the T-Rex from Texas, out here. Howdy, y'all. How's it going? This is a really fun end screen video. We should have written a script, right, Chuck? Oh, I agree totally. In fact, I think both our voices sound exactly the same. What are we to do? I don't know. I think we need to get a better voice actor. Yes, I agree. Which one of us is talking? Ah. They're still here. What are we gonna do? I guess we're gonna stop and record.